The Montana Territory, 1882. A time when promises were carried by wind and hope traveled by rail. A time when a woman's worth was measured in the strength of her back and the health of her complexion. And a time when Lillian Abernathy, with her persistent cough and pale skin, would be deemed damaged goods by a man who had never even met her. But fate has strange ways of leading souls to where they truly belong, even if it's through the bitter disappointment of being left alone at a train platform with nothing but a letter of rejection and the setting sun as witness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Winter had fallen early on Copper Creek, a settlement too small to be called a town, but too stubborn to fade into wilderness. The train depot, little more than a wooden platform with a rusted stove inside its single room, stood alone against the cutting November wind. Snow didn't fall so much as it was thrown sideways, whisking across the platform in ghostly swirls that danced and vanished into darkness. Lillian Abernathy pulled her thin wool coat tighter around her shoulders, but the gesture was more habit than hope. The cold had already worked its way through every layer of fabric, settling deep into her bones like an unwelcome tenant who paid no rent but took up all the space. Her trunk stood beside her, its leather corners cracked and peeling, much like the dreams that had carried her from Philadelphia to this remote corner of the Montana Territory. The station master, a gruff man named Hobson, with a face like a dried apple and twice the sourness, gave her another pitying glance through the frosted window. He'd already offered to let her stay until morning, but pride, that most expensive of luxuries, had made Lillian decline. She would not accept charity. Not yet. Not when she still had her dignity, even if it was the only thing warming her now. The letter crinkled in her pocket when she shifted her weight, trying to restore feeling to her feet. She didn't need to read it again. The words had burned themselves into her memory like cattle brands. Miss Abernathy, upon hearing of your condition from mutual acquaintances who witnessed your boarding in Philadelphia, I must rescind my offer of matrimony. My homestead requires a strong wife, not one whose constitution would buckle under Montana winters. I have paid for your return passage to Philadelphia, which you may claim at the station office. Respectfully, Theodore Wright, respectfully, as if rejection could ever wear the cloak of respect, as if a man who had promised to meet her, who had exchanged letters for 8 months, who had claimed to see something of value in her words and thoughts, could respectfully abandon her on the edge of wilderness when he learned she wasn't as robust as he'd hoped. Another coughing spell seized her, and Lillian pressed her handkerchief to her mouth, willing the spasm to pass quickly. When she pulled it away, she was relieved to see no blood, just the usual mucus that had plagued her since childhood. The wasting sickness, her mother had called it, though doctors had given it fancier names over the years. None had been able to cure it. The last train eastbound had departed 2 hours ago. Lillian had watched it pull away, a part of her wanting to board and another part refusing to retreat. She had spent every penny she had to come west. Her seamstress position was gone, her room rented to another. Philadelphia held nothing but memories of a father who had drunk himself to death and a mother who had worked herself into an early grave trying to keep them afloat. Miss? Hobson had emerged from the station, a lantern swinging from his gnarled hand. Last stage to Silver Falls leaves in 10 minutes. Won't be another until Tuesday, if the weather holds. I haven't decided, Lillian replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Ain't much to decide, Hobson said, not unkindly. You can't stay here, and there's no rooms at Jenkins' boarding house. Silver Falls has the Widow Parker's place, clean beds, fair prices. Another cough racked her body, and Hobson took a step back, wariness replacing concern in his eyes. Lillian had seen that look before, the moment when sympathy calcified into fear. I'll take the stage, she said quietly. The stagecoach was little more than a glorified wagon with hard benches and threadbare curtains that did little to keep out the cold. Lillian sat alone, her trunk secured on top, her future as uncertain as the road ahead. The driver, a man of few words and fewer teeth, had merely grunted when she boarded. His disinterest was a mercy. The rocking motion of the coach, as it navigated the rutted road, lulled Lillian into a state between wakefulness and sleep. In this half-dreaming state, her mind wandered back to the letters that had brought her here. Theodore Wright had written of his 160 acres, of the cabin he'd built with his own hands, of the need for a practical wife who could help him tame the wilderness. He hadn't asked for beauty or youth. Lillian, at 32, could claim neither. But for a woman of education and good sense, I have no use for frivolous females, he had written, but a woman who can read, who can manage accounts, who understands that life here is built on work and patience, such a woman would be worth more than gold. Lillian had believed him. She'd sewn a new dress for the journey, packed the books she couldn't bear to leave behind, sold everything else. She'd endured the cramped quarters of third-class train travel, the suspicious glances of fellow passengers when she coughed, the discomfort of sleeping upright for days, all for nothing. The stagecoach lurched violently, jolting Lillian from her reverie. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal, and snowflakes pelted the windows with increasing fury. "Bad storm coming," the driver called back, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Might have to stop at Miller's station." Lillian felt her heart sink further. Another delay, another unfamiliar place. But the alternative, traveling through a blizzard, was worse. She nodded, though the driver couldn't see her, and braced herself as the coach picked up speed, racing against the worsening weather. Miller's station turned out to be little more than a trading post with attached quarters. The proprietor, a barrel-chested man with a beard that reached mid-chest, seemed put out by their arrival, but grudgingly showed Lillian to a small room off the main store. It smelled of tobacco and hides, but it was warm, and after the biting cold, warmth seemed like luxury itself. "Stage ain't leaving till morning, if then," the driver informed her before disappearing into another room where, judging by the laughter and clinking glasses, several men were passing the storm with whiskey and cards. Alone again, Lillian sat on the narrow cot and finally allowed herself the release of tears. They came silently, years of practice ensuring that her grief made no sound. She cried for the hope that had carried her west, for the rejection that had met her, for the uncertainty that now loomed. The door opened without warning, and Lillian hastily wiped her eyes. A tall man stood in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the lanterns in the main room. For a moment, neither spoke. "Pardon the intrusion," he said finally, his voice a deep baritone that somehow matched his imposing frame. "Miller said you might need these." He held out a bundle. Blankets, from the look of them. "Thank you," Lillian managed, reaching to take them. The man stepped into the room, and in the dim light Lillian could make out his features. He wasn't young, perhaps 40 or so, with a strong jaw partially hidden beneath a neatly trimmed beard sprinkled with silver. His eyes, deep-set and thoughtful, assessed her with neither pity nor judgment. "The stage was caught in the storm?" he asked, remaining by the door. "Yes, we were bound for Silver Falls." Bad timing. This storm came in faster than anyone expected. As if to punctuate his statement, a violent gust rattled the window, making Lillian jump slightly. The movement triggered another coughing fit, and she turned away, pressing her handkerchief to her mouth again. The man didn't retreat as most did. Instead, he waited until the spasm passed, then asked, "How long have you had that cough?" The directness of his question surprised her. "Most of my life," she answered honestly. "It worsens in winter." He nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "I'm Dr. Nathaniel Harrison," he said, "though most folks around here just call me the apothecary." "Lillian Abernathy," she replied, then added with a touch of bitterness she couldn't quite suppress, "Just Lillian will do." "Well, just Lillian," he said, a slight smile warming his features. "I have some preparations that might ease that cough, if you're willing." She'd tried countless remedies over the years, tonics and syrups, poultices and steam treatments. None had offered more than temporary relief. But something about Dr. Harrison's steady gaze made her nod. "I'll fetch them," he said, and was gone before she could respond. Alone again, Lillian spread the blankets on the cot. They were surprisingly soft, made of wool, but lined with some kind of fur. The simple kindness of them, and of the man who had brought them, made her throat tighten again. Dr. Harrison returned carrying a small wooden box. He set it on the room's only table and opened it, revealing an organized collection of bottles and tins. With practiced movements, he selected several and began combining their contents in a small pot. "I need to heat this," he explained. "May I use your stove?" The tiny iron stove in the corner barely deserved the name, but Lillian nodded. As he worked, she studied him more closely. His clothes were of good quality but showed signs of wear, not the garments of a wealthy man, but of one who valued quality over quantity. His hands, large and strong, moved with surprising delicacy as he measured and mixed, preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You're not from around here," he observed without looking up from his work. "No, Philadelphia. That's a long way to travel alone." The unspoken question hung in the air between them. Lillian considered deflection, but found herself too tired for pretense. "I came to marry a man I'd never met," she said flatly. "He changed his mind when he heard I was sickly." Dr. Harrison's hands paused momentarily, then resumed their work. "Theodore Wright," he said, not a question, but a statement. Lillian felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "News travels quickly here. Small communities have little else to trade but information," he replied. And Wright's search for a mail-order bride was no secret. Neither was his decision to cancel the arrangement when he heard you were ill. "From mutual acquaintances," Lillian quoted bitterly. "People I never even met who took it upon themselves to inform him I coughed during the journey." Dr. Harrison made a sound that might have been disgusting. "Wright always did prefer his cattle and land to actual people. Probably for the best you didn't end up with him." "Easy for you to say," Lillian retorted, an edge creeping into her voice. "You're not the one stranded with no prospects and dwindling funds." Instead of taking offense, he nodded, accepting the rebuke. "Fair point, though Silver Falls might offer more opportunities than you think." The mixture on the stove had begun to emit a fragrant steam, herbs and something else, something almost sweet. Dr. Harrison poured it carefully into a cup and added a spoonful of honey. "Drink this while it's hot," he instructed, handing it to her. "All of it." Lillian took the cup cautiously. The liquid was amber-colored and smelled of pine and mint, and something else she couldn't identify. "What is it?" "A combination of white, pine bark, wild cherry, hyssop, and a few other things that grow in these mountains," he explained. "Nothing dangerous, I assure you." She took a tentative sip. The taste was strange but not unpleasant, bitter at first, then sweeter as the honey came through. Almost immediately she felt a warming sensation spread through her chest. "I've tried pine bark syrup before," she said after another sip. "This is different." "The proportions matter," Dr. Harrison replied, repacking his box, "as does the freshness of the ingredients. Most commercial preparations lose potency during shipping." Lillian continued drinking, surprised to find the tightness in her chest easing with each swallow. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside this small room, with the warmth of the stove and the unexpected kindness of a stranger, she felt, if not safe, then at least less adrift. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. Dr. Harrison looked up, seeming genuinely puzzled by the question. "Why wouldn't I? Most people avoid the sick, especially strangers." He closed his box with a soft click. "I'm not most people, Miss Abernathy, and illness doesn't make someone any less deserving of basic decency." There was something unspoken in his words, some personal history that colored them with conviction. Lillian didn't press. Everyone in this harsh territory carried their own stories, their own scars. "Thank you," she said simply. "You should try to rest," he advised, moving toward the door. "I'll leave another dose for the morning." "Will I see you again?" The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. Dr. Harrison paused, his hand on the door latch. "I'm headed to Silver Falls myself once the storm breaks. Perhaps we'll travel the same road." After he left, Lillian finished the medicine and lay down, wrapping herself in the borrowed blankets. For the first time in longer than she could remember, her breathing came easier, without the rattle that usually accompanied each inhale. Outside, the wind still howled, but it seemed more distant now, less threatening. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. She still had no plan, no destination beyond Silver Falls, no prospects and little money. But tonight, in this moment, she allowed herself a fragile thread of something she'd nearly forgotten: hope. Dawn broke over Miller's station with reluctant light, as if the sun itself struggled against the lingering storm. The snowfall had ceased, but drifts stood shoulder-high against the trading post's walls, and the world beyond the frosted windows was a landscape transformed, familiar shapes rendered strange and new beneath their white mantles. Lillian woke up feeling different. The crushing exhaustion that typically followed her through each morning had eased, replaced by something almost like energy. Her lungs, though not entirely clear, drew air without the painful catch that had become her constant companion. She sat up slowly, half expecting the improvement to vanish like morning mist, but it remained. On the small table beside her cot sat another cup, covered with a clean cloth. Beside it lay a folded note. Lillian reached for it, the paper crisp beneath her fingers. "Take this before you travel. The stage departs at 9 if the roads are passable." Nature. The mixture was similar to the one from the previous night, though somewhat thicker. Lillian drank it without hesitation, noting the same warming sensation spreading through her chest. Whatever Dr. Harrison had concocted, it worked better than any remedy she'd tried before. The common room of the trading post bustled with activity when Lillian emerged. Several men in heavy coats argued over the best route to clear, while others wolfed down plates of beans and biscuits near the large stone fireplace. Miller himself stood behind the counter, tallying figures in a ledger with the concentration of a surgeon. "Thought you might sleep through departure," a familiar voice observed. Dr. Harrison sat at a small table near the window, a mug of coffee and a worn book open before him. In daylight, Lillian could see him more clearly. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting across vast distances. Yet there was a gentleness there too, particularly in the way he closed his book with care, marking his place with a leather cord. "Your medicine helped," Lillian said, approaching his table. "I haven't slept so soundly in years." "Good." The white Epine is particularly effective for wet coughs. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Have you eaten?" Lillian hesitated. Her funds were limited, and she'd need to be careful with every penny until she could find work. Dr. Harrison seemed to read her thoughts. "The stage fare includes breakfast," he said simply. "Miller's biscuits are worth claiming your share." Pride warred with practicality for a moment before hunger tipped the scales. Lillian nodded and took the offered seat. "You mentioned you're also traveling to Silver Falls," she asked as Miller's wife, a stout woman with quick movements and quicker eyes, placed a plate before her. Yes, I make a circuit of the smaller settlements every few months. Silver Falls is my primary residence, but places like Copper Creek and Blackwater Gulch need medical attention too. A traveling doctor, Lillian mused, breaking open a biscuit still steaming from the oven. Apothecary, he corrected with a slight smile. I never completed formal medical training. The war interrupted. He didn't specify which war, but the shadow that briefly crossed his face told Lillian enough. Yet people trust you with their health. Out here, folks make do with what's available, and I've had good teachers, local healers, books, and most importantly, observation. Nature provides remedies if you know where to look. There was passion in his voice when he spoke of plants and their properties. Lillian found herself drawn in, despite her usual caution around strangers. Perhaps it was the lingering effect of a night's peaceful sleep, or maybe just the relief of speaking with someone who didn't recoil from her cough, but she felt herself relaxing into conversation with this unusual man. Stage leaves in 20 minutes. The driver called from the doorway, stomping snow from his boots. Road's been cleared enough to pass, but it'll be slow going. The announcement brought reality crashing back. Lillian still had no real plan beyond reaching Silver Falls. She had enough money for perhaps 2 weeks at a modest boarding house, after which... You're worried, Dr. Harrison observed quietly. Lillian straightened her shoulders. I'm practical. Silver Falls is unfamiliar territory. It's a decent town, smaller than what you're used to, I imagine, but growing. The silver mines bring steady work, and where there are working men, there's a need for services. I doubt miners have much need for seamstresses, Lillian said, voicing the occupation she'd left behind in Philadelphia. Perhaps not for fancy dresses, but they tear their work clothes constantly, and the families of the mine owners and merchants would appreciate skilled needlework. He paused, studying her with those thoughtful eyes. But you have other skills, too, don't you? Surprised, Lillian asked, what makes you say that? Your speech, for one. The books in your trunk. I noticed their spines when you opened it last night. Dickens, Austen, not typical reading for someone with limited education. Lillian felt exposed, as if he'd peered directly into her past. My father was a professor. Before he fell on hard times, he insisted on educating me himself when we could no longer afford proper schooling. Dr. Harrison nodded, no judgment in his expression. Education is never wasted, especially in frontier towns. Silver Falls has a school, but the teacher left last month. Her husband struck silver and they moved to Denver. The implication hung between them. Lillian had indeed taught briefly in Philadelphia before her cough had alarmed too many parents. Teaching requires good health, she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. It requires knowledge and patience, Dr. Harrison countered, both of which you seem to possess. The rest, he gestured to the empty cup before her, we might be able to address. We? I've been working on treatments for respiratory ailments for years. Your case is interesting. You mean pitiful? I mean medically intriguing, he corrected firmly, and potentially treatable with the right approach. Before Lillian could respond, the stagecoach driver bellowed another warning. Around them, travelers gathered their belongings, preparing to depart. This conversation isn't finished, Dr. Harrison said, rising from his seat, but perhaps we should continue it on the road. The stagecoach journey to Silver Falls proved even more uncomfortable than the previous day's travel. With the road partially blocked by snowdrifts, the coach lurched and swayed alarmingly as it navigated narrow passages cleared by earlier travelers. Inside, passengers were pressed together more tightly than proprietary, typically allowed, but emergency conditions suspended normal conventions. Lillian found herself seated beside Dr. Harrison, their shoulders touching with each jolt of the wagon. Across from them, a young mother clutched a sleeping infant, while beside her a grizzled miner snored loudly, his head lolling against the window. "How much further to Silver Falls?" Lillian asked quietly, after a particularly violent lurch nearly sent her into Dr. Harrison's lap. "About 4 hours in good conditions," he replied. "Today, probably closer to 6. The news wasn't welcome, but Lillian had endured worse discomforts. She shifted slightly, trying to find a position that didn't strain her back or press too intimately against her traveling companion. "Here," Dr. Harrison said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small tin and opened it, revealing what looked like hard candies. "Horehound drops with honey and wild cherry. They'll soothe your throat during the journey." Lillian accepted, and with murmured thanks. The candy was surprisingly pleasant, bitter at first, then mellowing to a herbal sweetness. "You've made quite a pharmacy out of your pockets," she observed. His smile was brief but genuine. "Habit. I never know when someone might need something." "And do they often?" "Need something, I mean. More than they realize." He glanced at the young mother across from them. "Like Mrs. Emerson there. She doesn't know yet that her baby's developing a fever." Lillian followed his gaze. The infant did look flushed, now that it was mentioned. "How can you tell?" "The skin around the temples has a particular sheen, and he's breathing faster than he should while sleeping." As if confirming his diagnosis, the baby stirred, letting out a thin, uncomfortable cry. Mrs. Emerson, clearly exhausted herself, tried to soothe him, but the cries intensified. Without hesitation, Dr. Harrison leaned forward. "Pardon me, ma'am. I couldn't help noticing that your little one seems uncomfortable. I'm Dr. Harrison from Silver Falls." The young woman looked up, relief flooding her tired face. "He's been fussy since last night. I thought maybe it was just traveling." "May I?" Dr. Harrison asked, hands hovering near but not touching the infant. At Mrs. Emerson's nod, he gently placed a palm against the baby's forehead. "Slight fever. Nothing dangerous yet, but worth addressing before we reach town." He reached into another pocket and withdrew a small bottle. 2 drops in a teaspoon of water every 4 hours. It will ease his discomfort and help reduce the fever. "I don't have much money," Mrs. Emerson began, embarrassment coloring her already flushed cheeks. Dr. Harrison waved away her concern. "First consultation is always free," he said. "Consider it a welcome to Silver Falls." The genuine kindness of the gesture struck Lillian deeply. In Philadelphia, doctors treated the poor with barely concealed disdain, if they treated them at all. Here was a man who carried medicines in his pockets just in case they might be needed, who noticed suffering before it was even voiced. "That was generous," she said quietly, after Mrs. Emerson had administered the drops and the baby had settled. Dr. Harrison shrugged, seeming almost uncomfortable with the observation. "It costs little to be kind, and healthy children make for a healthier community." "Is that why you became a healer? For the community?" He was silent for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "Meant only for her ears. I was a soldier first. Saw too much death cause some of it. After that," he looked down at his hands, strong and capable. "After that, I needed to balance the scales." The simple honesty of his statement hung between them, more intimate than any touch. Lillian found herself wanting to offer comfort, though she sensed he wasn't a man who accepted it easily. "From what I've seen, your scales tip heavily toward life," she said. His eyes, when they met hers, held a warmth that had nothing to do with the cramped quarters of the stagecoach. The journey continued in companionable conversation, punctuated by stretches of comfortable silence. Dr. Harrison asked about her life in Philadelphia, not probing but genuinely interested. Lillian found herself sharing more than she'd intended. Her father's decline into alcoholism after her mother's death, the gradual swelling of their belongings to cover debts, the way she'd taught herself seamstress skills to survive. In return, he told her about Silver Falls, a town that had sprung up almost overnight when silver was discovered in the nearby mountains 6 years earlier. Unlike many mining towns, it had established itself as something more permanent, with families settling alongside the initial wave of prospectors. "It's still rough around the edges," he admitted, "but there's a real community forming. A church, a school, when we have a teacher, even a small library, though most of the books came from my own collection." "You donated your books?" "Loaned them," he corrected with a smile, "though I suspect some may never return home. Books, like medicine, are most useful when shared." The coach hit a particularly deep rut, jolting everyone inside. The baby woke with a cry, and Mrs. Emerson looked close to tears herself from exhaustion. Without discussion, Lillian held out her arms. "May I? Just for a little while so you can rest." The relief on the young mother's face was answer enough. She carefully transferred the bundled infant to Lillian, murmuring grateful thanks before leaning back against the seat and closing her eyes. The baby, a boy, judging by the blue ribbon on his blanket, regarded Lillian with solemn eyes. He was beautiful in the way all babies are, with plump cheeks and a serious expression that seemed to evaluate her worthiness to hold him. "Hello, little sir," she whispered, gently bouncing him as he fussed. "You've had quite an adventure already, haven't you?" To her surprise, he settled against her, tiny fingers catching a loose strand of her hair. The trust of it, unearned and complete, made her throat tighten with emotion. Dr. Harrison watched the exchange with an unreadable expression. "You're good with him," he observed. "I had younger siblings," Lillian replied, not adding that none had survived past early childhood. Some sorrows were too heavy for casual conversation, even with a man as seemingly understanding as Dr. Harrison. The baby eventually dozed off against her shoulder, his warm weight both foreign and familiar. Lillian found herself relaxing as well, lulled by the rhythm of the coach and the steady presence of the man beside her. "We're entering Silver Falls," the driver called from above, his voice cutting through Lillian's own near doze. She straightened, suddenly alert and anxious again. This was it, the place where she would somehow need to build a new life from the wreckage of her old plans. The town that would either offer sanctuary or rejection. "You'll be fine," Dr. Harrison said softly, as if reading her thoughts. Mrs. Emerson woke as the coach slowed, gratefully reclaiming her sleeping child. "Thank you," she said to Lillian. "My husband's meeting us. He came ahead to secure work at the mine. I don't know what I'd have done traveling alone with a sick baby." "That's what communities do," Dr. Harrison said, echoing his earlier sentiment. "Help each other through difficult passages." The stagecoach pulled to a stop with a final lurch and creak of springs. Outside, Lillian could hear voices, the clatter of horses, the sounds of a town very much alive despite the recent storm. "Ready?" Dr. Harrison asked, offering his hand as the door swung open. Lillian hesitated only briefly before accepting it. His grip was steady, warm even through her gloves. "As I'll ever be," she replied, and stepped out into Silver Falls. Main Street stretched before her, lined with buildings both hastily constructed and surprisingly substantial. A hotel with actual glass windows stood proudly at one end, while closer to the stagecoach stop, a row of shops displayed their wares. Behind snow-dusted porches, people hurried along the boardwalks, bundled against the cold, miners in heavy coats, women in practical woolens, children darting between adults with the universal energy of youth. It wasn't Philadelphia, with its cobbled streets and gas lamps. It wasn't even trying to be. Silver Falls existed on its own terms, raw, vital, and unapologetically frontier. "Dr. Harrison," a man called from across the street, waving enthusiastically. "You're back. My Betsy's time is getting close." "Mr. Calloway," Dr. Harrison acknowledged with a nod. I'll stop by this afternoon." Similar greetings came from all directions as people noticed his return. Shopkeepers stepped onto their porches, women paused in their errands. Even the sheriff raised a hand in welcome from the doorway of his office. It was clear that this was a man not merely tolerated in the community, but essential to it. Respected, perhaps even beloved. Standing beside him, still holding his arm, Lillian felt both invisible and conspicuous. The curious glances directed their way made her acutely aware of her travel-worn appearance and her position as a stranger. "Everyone knows you," she murmured. "In communities this size, everyone knows everyone," he replied. "Which means you won't be a stranger for long." Whether that was a promise or a warning remained to be seen. The Widow Parker's boarding house stood 3 streets back from Silver Falls' main thoroughfare, a 2-story structure of sturdy pine with green shutters and a wide porch swept clean of snow. Smoke curled from twin chimneys, promising warmth within, and lace curtains hung in the windows, a touch of gentility in a frontier town that had little use for pretension. "Best lodging in town for a respectable woman," Dr. Harrison explained, as he helped the stagecoach driver unload Lillian's trunk. "Mrs. Parker keeps a tight ship, but she's fair-minded, and her cooking is unmatched in the territory." As if summoned by the mention of her name, the front door swung open, revealing a woman who defied Lillian's expectations. Rather than the stern-faced matron she had imagined, Widow Parker was a handsome woman of perhaps 50, with auburn hair barely touched by grey and laugh lines carved deep around bright eyes. She wore a practical dress of dark blue wool, its sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a white apron dusted with flour. "Nathaniel Harrison," she called, wiping her hands. "About time you returned. Half the town's been asking when you'd be back." "Eleanor," he greeted her with genuine warmth. "I see you've been busy with your famous sourdough. Apple pies today, actually." Her gaze shifted to Lillian, sharp but not unkind. "And who's this?" "Miss Lillian Abernathy, recently arrived from Philadelphia. She's in need of lodging." Widow Parker, Eleanor, assessed Lillian with the practiced eye of someone who had seen many travelers come and go. "Philadelphia's a long way," she observed. "What brings you to our little corner of nowhere, Miss Abernathy?" The question, though expected, still made Lillian's cheeks warm with embarrassment. How to explain that she had traveled across the country to marry a stranger, only to be rejected sight unseen? Dr. Harrison intervened smoothly. "Miss Abernathy is considering teaching positions. Silver Falls might benefit from her experience, given Mrs. Whitaker's departure." It wasn't exactly a lie, though it sidestepped the more humiliating truth. Lillian shot him a grateful glance before addressing the widow directly. "I hope I'm not imposing. I require lodging for at least 2 weeks while I explore opportunities in Silver Falls." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "2 weeks is easily managed. I've a room on the 2nd floor, small but with its own stove and a view of the mountains. $5 a week, including breakfast and supper." The rate was fair, possibly even generous by frontier standards. Lillian nodded, relief washing through her. "That would be perfect, thank you." "Well then," Eleanor said briskly, "let's get you settled. Nathaniel, you're staying for supper, I hope. The Caldwell twins have been asking after you daily." "Something about a promised chess lesson," Dr. Harrison smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "I wouldn't miss it. But I should see a few patients first. Miss Abernathy, I'll call on you tomorrow regarding that treatment we discussed." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, striding back toward the main street with purposeful steps. Lillian watched him go, feeling oddly bereft, despite having known him less than a day. "Interesting man, our Dr. Harrison," Eleanor observed, "missing nothing. Came here 5 years ago with little more than his medical bag and that serious expression. Now, half the territory depends on his remedies." Lillian didn't know how to respond to the comment, or the speculative look that accompanied it. so she simply nodded and followed Eleanor inside. The boarding house interior was as well maintained as its exterior suggested. A central hallway led past a formal parlor and a dining room to what appeared to be a cozy sitting room at the rear. The scent of baking apples and cinnamon hung in the air, mingling with beeswax polish and the fainter smell of lavender sachets. "Supper's at 6 sharp," Eleanor explained as she led Lillian up a well-swept staircase. "Breakfast from 7 to 8. I don't provide midday meals as most folks are about their business, but there's always bread and preserves in the kitchen, if you're in need." The room, when they reached it, was indeed small, but scrupulously clean. A narrow bed with a brass frame stood against one wall, made up with a colorful quilt and plump pillows. A washstand with pitcher and bowl occupied another corner, while a rocking chair sat near the window, currently frosted with delicate patterns of ice. As promised, a small iron stove squatted in the remaining corner, already lit and radiating welcome heat. Beside it stood a simple desk and chair with an oil lamp ready for evening use. "It's lovely," Lillian said sincerely. After weeks of travel and the uncertainties of the past 24 hours, the simple, tidy space felt like luxury itself. "It'll do," Eleanor replied, but her tone suggested she was pleased with the assessment. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall. You'll share with Mrs. Collins, the dressmaker, and Miss Jenkins, who clerks at the Mercantile, both respectable women who keep to themselves." Lillian nodded her understanding. In such close quarters, compatible. Neighbors were as important as the accommodations themselves. "I'll have hot water sent up so you can freshen up before supper," Eleanor continued. "Any questions, just ask. And Miss Abernathy?" "Yes, welcome to Silver Falls." Left alone, Lillian sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion and emotion. She had made it, not to the life she had expected, but to shelter at least, to a town that might or might not offer her a future, to a place where she knew exactly one person who wasn't her landlady. A coughing fit seized her, less severe than usual, but still enough to remind her of the condition that had left her in this precarious position. When it passed, she unpacked her few belongings, arranging them carefully to make the small room feel more like her own. The books, her most treasured possessions, she stacked on the desk, ready companions for the uncertain days ahead. By the time a young girl arrived with steaming water for the washstand, Lillian had composed herself. She washed away the dust of travel, changed into her second-best dress, navy blue with a modest lace collar, and pinned her hair into a simple but neat arrangement. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she assessed herself objectively. At 32, she was past what most considered a woman's prime. The years of struggling to breathe properly had left their mark in the faint shadows beneath her eyes and the slight hollowness of her cheeks. Yet there was strength in her gaze, determination in the set of her chin. She might be damaged goods in Theodore Wright's estimation, but she wasn't finished yet. The dining room held 3 tables, only one of which was set for the evening meal. 5 places waited with simple white plates and sturdy flatware. Evidently the boarding house was not currently at capacity. Lillian was the first to arrive, but was soon joined by a plump, cheerful woman who introduced herself as Beatrice Collins, the dressmaker Eleanor had mentioned. "New arrivals are always welcome," Beatrice declared, settling into a chair with a rustle of taffeta. Her own dress, unsurprisingly, was impeccably made, with tiny covered buttons and perfectly matched seams. "We don't get many single ladies venturing this far west. What brings you to our little silver town?" Before Lillian could formulate a response. That wasn't entirely humiliating. Eleanor entered with a tureen of fragrant stew, followed by a slender young woman who must be Miss Jenkins from the Mercantile. "Now, Beatrice," Eleanor chided gently, "let the poor woman catch her breath before the interrogation begins. She only arrived an hour ago." Beatrice had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Forgive my curiosity, Miss Abernathy. It's just that news is our most precious commodity out here. I understand, Lillian said, accepting a bowl of stew from Eleanor, and I don't mind the question. I came west hoping for new opportunities. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either, and it seemed to satisfy Beatrice, who nodded sympathetically. Haven't we all? I left St. Louis after Harold passed, God rest him, with nothing but my scissors and my determination. Now I outfit half the county's respectable ladies and even some of the less respectable ones. Her wink suggested there was a story there. But before she could elaborate, the final dinner guest arrived, an elderly gentleman with a magnificent white mustache and the erect posture of someone who had spent a lifetime standing at attention. Ladies, he greeted them with a slight bow. Miss Abernathy, I presume. Eleanor mentioned our new guest, Colonel James Thaddeus Pemberton, at your service. The colonel was with General Sherman, Miss Jenkins explained, speaking for the first time. Her voice was surprisingly deep and melodious for such a slight woman. He has the most fascinating stories of the war. Only if one finds destruction fascinating, the colonel said, his tone suggesting he had long since made peace with whatever he had witnessed. I much prefer discussing the future to rehashing the past. Speaking of which, Miss Abernathy, I understand you're a teacher. Surprised, Lillian glanced at Eleanor, who shrugged innocently. News truly did travel quickly in Silver Falls. I have some experience teaching, yes, she admitted cautiously. Excellent, the colonel beamed. As chairman of our small school board, a grand title for 3 old men who meet monthly, I've been most concerned about replacing Mrs. Whitaker. The children have been running wild for nearly a month now. Lillian set down her spoon, suddenly nervous. I haven't applied for any position yet, Colonel. I've only just arrived. Of course, but we're not exactly overrun with qualified candidates out here. If you're interested, I'd be delighted to introduce you to the other board members, Reverend Collins, Beatrice's brother-in-law, and Mr. Hollister, the bank manager. It was happening too quickly. Lillian had imagined having time to settle, to assess the town, to consider her options, yet here was an opportunity presenting itself before she'd even unpacked properly. I would need to know more about the position, she said carefully. The number of students, their ages, the curriculum. 28. Pupils at last count, the colonel replied promptly. Ages 6 to 16, though the older boys often leave schooling by 14 to work the mines. Basic reading, writing, arithmetic, some history and geography. The schoolhouse is small but sound, with a decent supply of books thanks to Dr. Harrison's generosity. Beatrice patted Lillian's hand encouragingly. You'd be doing the town a great service, my dear. Mrs. Whitaker was well-meaning, but strict to the point of cruelty. The children need someone with a gentler approach. Lillian's mind raced. Teaching again hadn't been her original plan when she'd set out for Montana, but it was a skill she possessed, a respectable position that would provide steady income. My health is somewhat delicate, she said hesitantly, feeling she should be honest about the very issue that had derailed her previous plans. To her surprise, this admission was met with shrugs rather than concern. Half the town coughs through winter, Eleanor said pragmatically. It's the dry air and the mine dust. No one expects perfection out here, just commitment. And Dr. Harrison is working wonders with respiratory ailments, Beatrice added. Just ask Mr. Peterson from the assay office. Couldn't walk 10 steps without wheezing last year. Now he's dancing at every social. The mention of Dr. Harrison sent an unexpected warmth through Lillian's chest that had nothing to do with her condition. His promise to help her, made so casually, yet with such conviction, seemed less like frontier optimism and more like genuine possibility in light of these testimonials. I would be happy to meet with the school board, she said finally, though I can't promise anything until I understand the position better. The colonel looked delighted. Wonderful. We'll convene tomorrow afternoon at the church. 2 o'clock. Suit you?" Before Lillian could respond, a commotion from the front of the house interrupted the conversation. The sound of the door opening was followed by urgent voices and heavy footsteps. Eleanor rose immediately, but before she could reach the dining room door, it swung open to reveal Dr. Harrison, his coat dusted with snow, his expression grave. "Pardon the intrusion," he said, nodding to the assembled diners. "There's been an accident at the Blackwater mine. Cave-in. 3 men were injured, 1 critically." The easy atmosphere of the dinner table evaporated instantly. The colonel stood, suddenly every inch the military commander. "What's needed, doctor?" "Men to help transport the injured, clean bandages and hot water." His gaze found Lillian, "and anyone with nursing experience, if possible." Without hesitation, Lillian rose from her seat. "I assisted at a charity hospital in Philadelphia," she said. It had been brief work, cut short by her coughing fits, but she had learned the basics of wound cleaning and bandaging. Dr. Harrison nodded, neither questioning her competence nor expressing surprise at her immediate offer. "Thank you. Miss Jenkins, could you open the mercantile? We'll need lanterns, blankets, perhaps ether, if Mr. Gardner keeps any in stock." The slender clerk was already on her feet. "Of course. I have the keys." The next hour passed in a flurry of activity. Eleanor transformed her kitchen into a staging area, boiling water, tearing sheets into bandages, assembling supplies. Beatrice took charge of preparing the parlor, pushing furniture aside to create space for pallets where the injured could be treated. The colonel departed with Dr. Harrison to help organize the rescue effort. Lillian worked alongside Eleanor, her movements efficient despite her racing heart. This was not how she had imagined her first evening in Silver Falls, yet there was something almost comforting in the crisis, in having a clear purpose, in being immediately useful rather than merely another mouth to feed. "You're handling this well," Eleanor observed as they rolled bandages together. "Some newcomers fall apart at the first sign of frontier hardship." "I'm familiar with crises," Lillian replied, not elaborating on the many times she had managed her father's drunken collapses or stretches when money was so scarce that each meal became a careful calculation. Eleanor seemed to understand, without explanation. "It shows you have steady hands." When the first injured miners arrived, carried on makeshift stretchers by grim-faced colleagues, Lillian's steady hands were put to immediate use. Under Dr. Harrison's terse direction, she cleaned dirt from lacerations, applied poultices to burns caused by falling lanterns, and held limbs steady while he set a broken arm. The worst case came last. A young man no more than 20, his face grey beneath the coal dust, his breathing shallow and irregular. A support beam had fallen across his chest, Dr. Harrison explained in clipped tones as they worked together, likely causing internal injuries. "Hold this compress," he instructed Lillian, placing her hands on a cloth soaked with some herbal preparation. Firm but gentle pressure. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and despite the gravity of the situation, Lillian felt a jolt of awareness. Dr. Harrison seemed to feel it too, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to his patient. Through the long night, they worked side by side, speaking little, but developing a rhythm that required minimal communication. Lillian anticipated his needs, handing him instruments or fresh bandages before he asked, holding lanterns at precisely the right angle, supporting patients in the positions he required. By dawn, the crisis had stabilized. 2 of the miners were resting comfortably, their injuries painful but not life-threatening. The young man with chest injuries had survived the night, a promising sign, though Dr. Harrison remained cautiously concerned. "You should rest," he told Lillian, as they finally stepped away from the makeshift infirmary the parlor had become. "You've been on your feet for over 12 hours. She was exhausted, her back aching, her eyes gritty with fatigue. Yet there was also a peculiar satisfaction in having been useful, in having proved her worth immediately upon arrival. "So have you," she pointed out. "I'm accustomed to it, and I'm tougher than I look." His mouth quivered in what might have been a smile if he weren't so clearly exhausted himself. "I noticed. Your assistance was invaluable. Coming from a man who chose his words with such care, the praise carried weight." Lillian felt herself flush slightly, annoyed at her own reaction. She was a grown woman, not a schoolgirl to be flustered by a man's approval. "Will they recover?" she asked, nodding toward the sleeping patients. "Barton and Miller will be back in the mines within a few weeks, though Miller's arm will need time to heal properly." His expression grew more somber. "Young Davis is harder to predict the internal damage," he trailed off, then added more firmly, "but he's young and strong. That counts for much." Eleanor appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "You both look dead on your feet," she observed bluntly. "This won't fix that, but it might help." The drinks turned out to be strong black coffee, liberally laced with something decidedly stronger. Lillian nearly choked on her first sip, but the warmth spread quickly through her exhausted body. "Thank you, Eleanor," Dr. Harrison said, downing him in a single long swallow, "for everything. I know this disruption to your home wasn't what you planned." "Disruptions are part of frontier life," the widow replied pragmatically. "Miss Abernathy learned that lesson quickly enough." Indeed, Lillian reflected as she sipped her fortified coffee, her first day in Silver Falls had been nothing like she had expected. Instead of carefully exploring the town, establishing herself gradually, she had been thrown directly into its heart, into its crises and community, its pain and resilience. "The Colonel mentioned you might be meeting with the school board today," Dr. Harrison said, apparently having overheard dinner conversations despite the emergency. "This afternoon," Lillian confirmed, "though I'm not certain I'm in any condition to make a good impression now." "On the contrary," Eleanor interjected, "the whole town's already talking about how you jumped right in to help. That counts for more out here than fancy words or appearances." Dr. Harrison nodded agreement. "Silver Falls values useful people, Miss Abernathy, and you've proven yourself remarkably useful already." The simple assessment, delivered without flattery or exaggeration, warmed Lillian more than Eleanor's spiked coffee. In Philadelphia, she had been defined by her limitations. The cough that kept her from regular employment, the poverty that kept her from proper society, the spinsterhood that made her invisible in many circles. Here, in less than a day, she had been defined by her actions instead. "I should check on Davis again," Dr. Harrison said after a moment, setting down his empty mug. "And then I promised to look in on Mrs. Calloway. Her time is near." "You need rest," Lillian found herself saying, concerned by the shadows beneath his eyes. His smile was genuine but weary. "Another frontier lesson, Miss Abernathy. Rest comes when the work is done, not when we're tired." As he turned to go, he added almost casually, "I haven't forgotten our discussion about your condition. Once things settle, we'll begin treatment properly. Your assistance last night, given without a single significant coughing episode, suggests my initial assessment was correct. Your ailment is manageable with the right approach." After he left, Lillian found herself standing motionless in Eleanor's kitchen, the nearly empty coffee mug cooling in her hands. Around her, Silver Falls was waking to a new day, a day in which 3 of its men lay injured, in which families would be coping with fear and uncertainty, in which work would somehow continue despite the night's emergency. And yet, amidst all that uncertainty, Dr. Harrison had still made time to offer her hope for her own condition. It was a small thing, perhaps, given the larger crises at hand, but to Lillian, who had lived so long with the limitations of her health, it felt enormous. "You should rest while you can," Eleanor advised, breaking into her thoughts. "The school board won't care if you have shadows under your eyes, but you'll want your wits about you." Lillian nodded, suddenly aware of just how bone-tired she truly was. "Wake me by noon. Count on it, and Miss Abernathy." "Yes? You did well. Very well indeed." Climbing the stairs to her small room, Lillian felt a strange lightness despite her exhaustion. She had come to Silver Falls as a rejected bride, humiliated and adrift, but in less than a day she had become something else. A potential teacher, a makeshift nurse, a woman of demonstrated worth rather than perceived weakness. It wasn't the life she had traveled west expecting. It might, she reflected as she fell into bed fully clothed, be something better. The Silver Falls schoolhouse sat on the edge of town, a simple clapboard structure painted white with a small bell tower that had developed a distinct tilt during the previous winter's heavy snows. Inside, rows of scarred wooden desks faced a larger teacher's desk positioned before a greenish-black slate board. A pot-bellied stove dominated one corner, currently radiating welcome heat against the persistent chill of early spring. Lillian stood before 24 expectant faces, some curious, some suspicious, a few openly hostile. It was her third week of teaching, and while most of the children had accepted her authority, a small faction led by 16-year-old Samuel Hollister, son of the bank manager and school board member, continued to test her at every opportunity. "Miss Abernathy," Samuel drawled from his seat at the back, intentionally sprawled across a desk built for someone much smaller. "My father says learning poetry is for dandies and women with too much time. Says a man needs figures and facts, not flowery words." Several of the older boys snickered. Lillian maintained her composure, though inside she felt a familiar tightening in her chest. Not from her ailment this time, but from frustration. "Your father is entitled to his opinion, Samuel," she said evenly, "just as Mr. Tennyson is entitled to his place in our curriculum. Now can anyone tell me the next line after 'to strive, to seek, to find'?" A small hand shot up in the front row. Abigail Jensen, the blacksmith's daughter, practically vibrated with eagerness. "Yes, Abigail." "And not to yield," the girl proclaimed triumphantly. "Excellent. And what do you think Ulysses means by that?" Before Abigail could respond, Samuel made a loud, theatrical snorting sound. "Means nothing at all. Just words to fill space on a page." Lillian turned to face him directly, her patience fraying. "Words are never just anything, Mr. Hollister. They build worlds, record history, inspire action. If you find Tennyson's particular words meaningless, perhaps you'd prefer to share that opinion in an essay, 3 pages on why practical knowledge supersedes literary understanding, due tomorrow." Samuel's face flushed with angry embarrassment as several of his classmates failed to suppress their amusement. He opened his mouth to retort, but Lillian had already turned back to the younger students. "Abigail, you were about to share your thoughts?" The rest of the morning passed without major incident, though Lillian could feel Samuel's resentful glare boring into her back as she wrote fractions on the board for the middle group. When the lunch bell finally rang, she suppressed a sigh of relief. Most of the children scattered to the schoolyard with their packed meals, but a few lingered, including Abigail and her friend Sarah Collins, Beatrice's niece. "Miss Abernathy." Abigail approached the desk hesitantly. "Is it true you came all the way from Philadelphia?" Lillian smiled, warming to this serious child with ink-stained fingers and an insatiable curiosity. "I did indeed. And is it also true you were supposed to marry Mr. Wright, but he left you at the station 'cause you were sick?" The blunt question landed like a physical blow. Lillian's smile froze as she struggled to maintain her composure. So the humiliating truth of her arrival was common knowledge, even among the children. "Abigail Jensen," Sarah hissed, elbowing her friend. "Aunt Bee said we're not supposed to mention that." "But I just wanted to know if—" "Girls," Lillian interrupted, finding her voice, "some matters are private, even if they're discussed publicly. Now, shouldn't you be enjoying your lunch hour?" Looking appropriately chastened, the girls hurried outside, leaving Lillian alone with the sudden weight of public knowledge. She had known, of course, that gossip traveled swiftly in small communities, but having her personal humiliation casually referenced by a 10-year-old was still jarring. She was still composing herself when a knock at the schoolhouse door drew her attention. Dr. Harrison stood in the doorway, holding a small wooden crate and wearing an expression somewhere between apologetic and concerned. "I thought you might have time for your treatment," he said, stepping inside, "but I can return later if this is inconvenient." Over the past 3 weeks, he had developed a tincture specifically for Lillian's respiratory condition. A combination of local herbs, honey, and other elements he declined to name precisely. "A physician's prerogative," he'd said with one of his rare smiles. The results had been remarkable. Her coughing fits had decreased in both frequency and severity, and the persistent tightness in her chest had eased considerably. "No, now is perfect," she assured him, genuinely glad for his company after the unsettling exchange with the girls. "The children are at lunch." He set the crate on her desk and began unpacking glass bottles and a measuring cup. "How are you feeling? Any tightness this morning?" "Some, but not significant." She watched as he carefully measured liquids from 3 different bottles. "The treatment is working better than I dared hope." "The body wants to heal," he replied, stirring the mixture with a glass rod. "Sometimes it just needs the right assistance." He handed her the cup and Lillian drank without hesitation. The taste had become familiar, bitter initially, then mellowing to something almost pleasant, with hints of pine and honey and a warming sensation that spread through her chest. "I heard about your confrontation with young Hollister," Dr. Harrison said casually as he repacked his supplies. "Word travels." "Evidently," Lillian said with more edge than she intended, "as does every detail of my personal history, it seems." He looked up, reading her expression correctly. "Ah, someone mentioned the circumstances of your arrival. Abigail Jensen, 10 years old and apparently fully informed about my rejection." Dr. Harrison sighed, closing the crate. "I'm sorry, Lillian. Small towns can be cruel that way, not intentionally, perhaps, but through the casual spreading of stories that aren't theirs to tell." It was the first time he had used her first name, she realized. Somehow, in this moment of mortification, the simple intimacy of it offered unexpected comfort. "It shouldn't matter," she said, rubbing her temples where a headache threatened. "It's been nearly a month. I have position, lodging, and respect from most of the community, yet hearing it from a child made it fresh again," he finished for her. "That's natural. But for what it's worth, Theodore Wright's rejection reflects far more poorly on him than on you in the town's estimation, particularly now that they've seen what you bring to the community." Lillian wasn't entirely convinced, but she appreciated the sentiment. In the weeks since her arrival, she had indeed established herself beyond being merely the rejected bride. Her work during the mine emergency had earned her respect from several key families. Her teaching, while controversial to some of the more traditional elements, had impressed many parents with its thoroughness and creativity. And then there was her evolving relationship with Dr. Harrison himself. They were colleagues of a sort. Now, he had enlisted her help in preparing some of his remedies, valuing her precise measurements and careful attention to detail. Their conversations had deepened from polite exchanges to genuine discussions about books, medicine, education, and the future of frontier communities like Silver Falls. Yet there remained a careful distance between them, a professional boundary. Neither had attempted to cross, despite moments of connection that hinted at deeper possibilities. "Samuel Hollister presents a more immediate challenge," Dr. Harrison observed, returning to their earlier topic. "His father is influential and not particularly progressive in his views on education." "Or on female authority," Lillian added dryly. Mr. Hollister made that quite clear during my interview with the school board. Only the colonel's support secured me the position. Hollister will come around, or he won't. Either way, you have allies here now. There was something in his tone, a certainty, a solidity that steadied her. Before she could respond, the schoolhouse door burst open and Sarah Collins rushed in, her face flushed with alarm. "Miss Abernathy, come quick!" Samuel pushed Ethan Davis down the embankment, and he's not moving. Lillian and Dr. Harrison exchanged one swift glance before rushing out after the girl. Behind the schoolhouse, a steep slope led down to a partially frozen creek. A group of children had gathered at its edge, looking down to where a small figure lay, crumpled on the icy bank below. "Everyone back," Dr. Harrison commanded, his voice cutting through the children's frightened chatter. "Sarah, run to the mercantile. Tell Mr. Jenkins we need rope and blankets immediately." The girl took off without question. Dr. Harrison was already making his way carefully down the slope, using small trees and rocks as handholds. Lillian turned to the remaining children. "Taking quick inventory, where is Samuel Hollister?" she demanded, not seeing the boy among the gathered students. "Ran off," one of the younger boys volunteered, "after Ethan fell." "What exactly happened?" Lillian asked, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. Several children spoke at once, but the story emerged clearly enough. Samuel had been taunting Ethan, a quiet 12-year-old whose father was the miner most seriously injured in the cave-in. When Ethan had tried to walk away, Samuel had shoved him perhaps harder than intended. The boy had lost his balance and tumbled down the embankment, striking his head on a rock near the bottom. Dr. Harrison had reached Ethan now. Even from the top of the slope, Lillian could see the grave concentration on his face as he examined. "The unconscious boy, is he—" A small voice quavered beside her. Abigail stood there, eyes wide with fear. "Dr. Harrison is with him now," Lillian said, putting a reassuring arm around the girl's shoulders. "He's the best physician in the territory." It wasn't mere comfort. She believed it absolutely. Over the past weeks, she had seen Dr. Harrison treat everything from minor cuts to childbirths with the same focused competence. If anyone could help, Ethan, now it was he. Sarah returned with Mr. Jenkins himself, carrying rope and blankets. 2 miners who had been drinking coffee at the mercantile followed, offering their help. Within minutes, they had created a makeshift rescue system, carefully raising the injured boy on a stretcher fashioned from blankets and branches. Ethan's face was ghostly pale, a stark contrast to the blood matting his light brown hair. Dr. Harrison's expression revealed nothing as he directed the miners to carry the boy with utmost care. "I need to take him to my clinic," he told Lillian in a low voice. "Possible skull fracture, definite concussion. The next few hours will be critical." "I'll dismiss the school and come help," she offered immediately. He shook his head. "Stay with the children. They're frightened enough. I'll send word once I've properly assessed his condition." As Dr. Harrison departed with Ethan and the miners, Lillian gathered the remaining students, working to project a calm she didn't feel. "School is dismissed for the remainder of the day," she announced. "Older students, please escort the younger. One's directly home. Tell your parents what happened, but try not to speculate or exaggerate. Ethan is receiving the best care possible." As the children dispersed in subdued groups, Lillian noticed the colonel approaching from the direction of town, his face grim. "Miss Abernathy," he greeted her with a curt nod. "I've just seen Dr. Harrison with the Davis boy. Terrible business. And I understand young Hollister was involved?" According to the other children, Samuel pushed Ethan, causing him to fall. Lillian confirmed, keeping her tone neutral despite her anger. "He ran off immediately after." The colonel's mustache twitched with disapproval. "Cowardly behavior. His father will hear of this, rest assured." "I'm more concerned about Ethan at the moment," Lillian said. "His father is still recovering from the mine accident. His mother will be devastated." Indeed, a doubly harsh blow for that family. The colonel hesitated, then added, "There's another matter we should discuss, Miss Abernathy. Perhaps we could walk toward town." Puzzled but compliant, Lillian fell into step beside him. They had gone several yards before he spoke again. "I understand there was some unpleasantness earlier. About your personal circumstances." Lillian stiffened. "News does travel extraordinarily fast in Silver Falls." "Small towns," the colonel said, an echo of Dr. Harrison's earlier comment. "For better and worse. But that's not why I mention it. There's been a development you should be aware of." A chill that had nothing to do with the weather ran through Lillian. "What development?" "Theodore Wright arrived in town last night. Apparently, he's reconsidered his position regarding your arrangement." The words struck Lillian like physical blows. Theodore Wright. Here? After leaving her stranded at the station, after rejecting her sight unseen because of her health? After she had built the beginnings of a new life without him. "That's impossible," she said faintly. "He made his position quite clear in his letter." "Yes? Well?" The colonel looked uncomfortable. "It seems your improved health has reached his ears. Dr. Harrison's treatment has become something of a local legend already. Wright apparently decided your condition might not be the impediment he initially feared." Anger flared, hot and sudden. "So now that Dr. Harrison has fixed me, Mr. Wright finds me acceptable again, as if I were a piece of damaged merchandise newly repaired." The colonel winced at her tone. "I simply thought you should know before you encountered him in town. He's been asking after you rather persistently." They had reached the main street now. Lillian scanned the boardwalks and storefronts with new wariness, half expecting to see a stranger approaching with proprietorial confidence. "Thank you for the warning, Colonel," she said stiffly. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on Ethan." Dr. Harrison's clinic occupied a small but well-built structure near the center of town, recognizable by the mortar and pestle painted on its sign. Inside, the front room served as a waiting area and dispensary, with shelves lined with bottles, jars, and neatly labeled boxes. A doorway, covered by a heavy curtain, led to the treatment area in the back. Mrs. Davis was already there, her face tear-streaked but composed as she spoke quietly with Dr. Harrison. She looked up when Lillian entered, offering a wan smile of recognition. "Miss Abernathy," she greeted her. "Dr. Harrison was just explaining Ethan's condition." "How is he?" Lillian asked, directing the question to both of them. "Stable," Dr. Harrison replied, his voice carrying the measured tone he used when delivering. "Difficult news. The skull isn't fractured, thankfully, but there's a significant concussion. He regained consciousness briefly but was disoriented. He's sleeping now, which is the best thing for him." "Will he recover fully?" Lillian pressed. A shadow crossed Dr. Harrison's face. "Head injuries are unpredictable. The next 24 hours will tell us more." Mrs. Davis's composure wavered briefly. "First James in the mine collapse, now Ethan. I don't know how much more our family can bear." Lillian moved to sit beside the distraught mother, taking her work-roughened hand in her own. "You're not alone in this. The whole community stands with you." It wasn't an empty platitude. In the weeks since her arrival, Lillian had witnessed Silver Falls rally around the Davis family after the mine accident, bringing meals, offering childcare for the younger children, even taking up a collection to cover expenses while James Davis recovered. "Samuel Hollister will answer for this," Mrs. Davis said, a flash of anger breaking through her worry. "Bullying my boy for weeks, and now this. His father may run the bank, but he can't protect the boy from the consequences of his actions." Dr. Harrison and Lillian exchanged glances. The situation had grown significantly more complicated. Samuel's actions had moved beyond schoolyard mischief to something potentially deadly, and his victim was the son of a family already suffering from another tragedy. The political dynamics, with Samuel's father on the school board and one of the town's Most powerful men added yet another layer of complexity. One crisis at a time, Dr. Harrison said gently. Let's focus on getting Ethan well first. Justice can follow recovery. Mrs. Davis nodded, visibly gathering herself. May I sit with him? Of course. Right through there. Call immediately if he wakes or if anything changes. After Mrs. Davis disappeared behind the curtain, Dr. Harrison turned to Lillian, his expression grave. This could divide the town. It already has, Lillian replied. And there's another complication. Briefly, she relayed what the colonel had told her about Theodore Wright's arrival. Dr. Harrison's reaction surprised her. Rather than the professional neutrality she'd expected, his face darkened with what looked remarkably like anger. The man has timing, I'll grant him that, he said, his voice unusually terse, though not much else to recommend him. You know him? Everyone knows everyone, remember? Wright's reputation precedes him, hard worker but harder personality, treats his livestock better than people, from what I've observed. And now he wants to reclaim his mail-order bride, Lillian said bitterly. Now that she's been repaired. Or through your medical expertise. Dr. Harrison stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. You're not obligated to him, Lillian. Whatever arrangement you had, he broke it when he rejected you. You've built something here, on your own terms. The intensity in his voice stirred something in her, something she'd been carefully avoiding acknowledging during their weeks of growing friendship. There was more than professional concern in his words. She was certain of it, before she could respond. The clinic door opened, admitting a gust of cold air and a tall, broad-shouldered man Lillian had never seen before. He removed his hat, revealing close-cropped sandy hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the hard set of its features. Dr. Harrison, the stranger nodded curtly. I was told I might find Miss Abernathy here. There was no need for introductions. Lillian knew instantly who stood before her, the man whose letter had shattered her hopes and sent her life in an entirely new direction. Theodore Wright in the flesh, neither as monstrous nor as impressive as her imagination, had painted him. Mr. Wright, she acknowledged, straightening her spine and lifting her chin slightly. Miss Abernathy. His eyes assessed her with unsettling directness. You're looking well, better than reports suggested you would. Thanks to Dr. Harrison's treatment, she replied coolly. Wright barely glanced at the physician. Convenient. We have matters to discuss, Miss Abernathy, privately. Any matters between us were concluded by your letter, Mr. Wright, quite definitively, as I recall. A muscle twitches in Wright's jaw. Circumstances have changed. I've reconsidered our arrangement. How fortunate for you that you believe arrangements can be reconsidered at will, Lillian said, her voice deceptively calm despite the anger coursing through her. I, however, have moved forward with my life. As a schoolteacher, there was dismissiveness in his tone that set her teeth on edge. That was never the plan. No, the plan was for me to be your wife, until you decided I was too sickly for the position. Plans change, Mr. Wright. People adapt. Dr. Harrison had remained silent during this exchange, but his presence behind Lillian felt like a bulwark, solid, supportive, unwavering. Wright's expression hardened further. I've paid for your passage west. I've prepared a home. I've waited for a bride. And rejected her, Lillian interrupted, finding strength in her indignation. You rejected me, Mr. Wright, based on hearsay about my health. You didn't even have the courtesy to meet me in person. Instead, you left me stranded at a remote station as night fell, with nothing but a letter and the return fare to a life I'd already left behind. Her voice had risen slightly, and she forced herself to take a deep breath, conscious of the treatment. A room where Ethan and his mother were just beyond the curtain. I understand you were disappointed, Wright said, his tone suggesting he was making a great concession. But I had to consider practical matters. A frontier wife needs stamina. When I heard your cough was severe, you made a judgment without bothering to learn the facts, Dr. Harrison interjected, speaking for the first time since Wright's arrival. Miss Abernathy's condition was, and is, treatable. More importantly, she's proven herself more than capable of frontier life, even before treatment improved her symptoms. Wright turned to him with barely concealed hostility. This is between Miss Abernathy and myself, Doctor. Our arrangement predates her acquaintance with you. An arrangement you terminated, Lillian reminded him firmly. I am no longer bound by its terms, nor interested in renewing them. For a moment, Wright looked genuinely surprised, as if the possibility of her refusal had never occurred to him. Then his expression settled into something harder, more calculating. You've signed a teaching contract, I understand. For how long? The abrupt change of topic caught Lillian off guard. Until the end of the school year. Why? And the school board can terminate that contract at any time with cause. Interesting. He replaced his hat with deliberate movements. We'll speak again, Miss Abernathy, when you've had time to consider your position more pragmatically. The implicit threat hung in the air as he turned and left, the door closing firmly behind him. Snow fell again that night, unseasonably late but not unprecedented in the Montana high country. By morning, Silver Falls lay beneath 4 inches of fresh powder, the streets transformed into pristine white paths until the first wagons and foot traffic carved dark trails through the brightness. Lillian stood at her classroom window, watching the early light transform snowflakes into brief, brilliant sparks before they joined their fellows on the sill. Behind her, the schoolroom stood empty, the desks arranged in precise rows, the slateboard wiped clean. No students would fill those seats today. School had been cancelled in the wake of Ethan Davis's injury. The accident, Theodore Wright's reappearance, and the implications of both had kept Lillian awake most of the night. By dawn, she had abandoned any pretense of sleep and dressed for the day, arriving at the schoolhouse before the sun had fully crested the eastern mountains. Here, in the quiet sanctuary of her classroom, she hoped to find clarity, some path forward through the complications that had suddenly entangled her carefully constructed new life. The door creaked open behind her. Lillian turned, startled, to find Mr. Hollister standing in the threshold, his expensive coat dusted with snow, his banker's hat clutched in gloved hands. The resemblance to his son was striking, the same square jaw, the same calculating eyes. Miss Abernathy, he said without preamble, we need to discuss yesterday's incident. Lillian straightened, drawing on her teacher's authority, despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest. Good morning, Mr. Hollister. I was just preparing for tomorrow's lessons. There may not be lessons tomorrow, or the day after. His tone was matter-of-fact, not threatening, which somehow made it worse. The school board is convening this afternoon to discuss the situation. I wasn't aware the board had scheduled a meeting. It's an emergency session, given the circumstances. Lillian moved to her desk, using the action to gather her thoughts. I assume you're referring to the accident involving your son and Ethan Davis. Accident is a generous characterization, Hollister replied. I understand you've accused Samuel of deliberately pushing the Davis boy. I reported what multiple witnesses told me, Lillian corrected firmly. Several children saw Samuel push Ethan, causing him to fall down the embankment. Samuel then fled the scene rather than helping or seeking assistance. Hollister's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Children exaggerate. They misunderstand playful roughhousing. Samuel says they were just fooling around, and the Davis boy slipped. Then why did Samuel run away? He panicked. He's a 16-year-old boy, not a man. The response was unfortunate but hardly criminal. Lillian studied the banker carefully. There was a calculation in his manner that went beyond fatherly concern, a smoothness that suggested this conversation was leading somewhere specific. "Ethan Davis is still unconscious," she said, deliberately emphasizing the severity of the situation. "Dr. Harrison is concerned about potential lasting effects from the head injury. This goes well beyond roughhousing, Mr. Hollister." "Unfortunate?" Certainly. The bank will cover the Davis family's medical expenses naturally." He waved a hand, as if dismissing an insignificant detail. "But there's the matter of supervision. The accident occurred during lunch hour, on school grounds, and there it was, the direction he had been heading all along. Blame. The children were in the schoolyard, where they've played every day since the school was built," Lillian replied, keeping her voice level despite her rising indignation. "I check on them regularly during the lunch period, as did Mrs. Whitaker, before me. But you weren't there when it happened." "I was inside, meeting with Dr. Harrison regarding my medical treatment. The accident occurred at the far edge of the schoolyard, near the creek, an area students have been repeatedly instructed to avoid." Hollister stepped further into the room, his posture subtly intimidating as he approached her desk. "The fact remains, Miss Abernathy, that a child was seriously injured under your supervision. The school board will need to consider whether the current arrangement is adequate." The threat was no longer veiled. Lillian stood her ground, meeting his gaze directly. "And who sits on this emergency session of the school board, Mr. Hollister? Will it be the usual 3 members? Yourself, Reverend Collins, and Colonel Pemberton, or will you be selecting a different composition for this particular meeting?" A flicker of surprise crossed his face at her directness. "The Colonel is unfortunately indisposed. Reverend Collins and I will constitute a quorum." "I see. And will parents of the students be invited to offer their perspectives? Mrs. Davis, perhaps?" His smile was thin. "This is an administrative matter, not a public forum." Of course." Lillian maintained her composure, though anger burned beneath it. "And will my presence be required at this administrative matter that directly concerns my employment?" "That won't be necessary. We'll inform you of the board's decision by evening." The injustice of it was breathtaking. No hearing, no defense, no opportunity to present her side of events. Just 2 men, one of them the father of the boy, responsible for the injury, deciding her professional fate behind closed doors. "Mr. Hollister," she said carefully, "I understand your concern for your son, but surely you recognize the conflict of interest in your participation in this decision." His expression hardened. "What I recognize, Miss Abernathy, is that Silver Falls requires stability and competent leadership in its institutions. The school is no exception." He paused, then added with deliberate casualness, "I understand Theodore Wright has returned to town. I believe you had a prior arrangement with him." The apparent non sequitur caught Lillian off guard. "Any arrangement I had with Mr. Wright was terminated by his own decision. Arrangements can be reinstated. Wright is a substantial property owner, a taxpayer of good standing. His word carries weight in this community." The implication was clear enough. Hollister was offering a choice that was no choice at all. Return to Theodore Wright and the original plan that had brought her west, or face dismissal from her teaching. "A position. I appreciate your concern for my future, Mr. Hollister," Lillian said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "But my personal affairs are not relevant to my professional capabilities. Everything is connected in a community this size, Miss Abernathy. Surely you've realized that by now." He replaced his hat with a smooth movement. "The board meets at 2. Good day." After he left, Lillian sank into her chair, trembling with a mixture of anger and dismay. In the span of 24 hours, the life she had carefully constructed in Silver Falls had begun to unravel. The teaching position that had given her purpose and independence was now threatened. Theodore Wright's return had reopened a wound she'd thought healed. Even her health, so much improved under Dr. Harrison's care, felt suddenly precarious again. As anxiety tightened her chest, Dr. Harrison, the thought of him steadied her somewhat. He would know what to do, or at least offer the clear-headed perspective she desperately needed now. Gathering her coat and hat, Lillian locked the schoolhouse and set out for his clinic, her boots crunching through fresh snow. The main street was busier now, with shopkeepers clearing their porches and early customers navigating the slippery boardwalks. She was halfway to the clinic when a figure stepped into her path. Theodore Wright, looking better rested than the previous day, but no less determined. "Miss Abernathy," he greeted her with a slight nod. "I thought we might continue our conversation from yesterday, perhaps over breakfast at the hotel restaurant." "I'm afraid I have a prior engagement," Lillian replied stiffly, trying to step. Around him, Wright moved to block her path again, not touching her but effectively preventing her progress. "I've spoken with Mr. Hollister this morning," he said, his voice lowered. "I understand your position at the school has become precarious." Anger flashed hot in Lillian's chest. So it had been coordinated. Hollister's threats and Wright's intervention, a carefully orchestrated pressure designed to herd her back to the original plan. "My position is no concern of yours, Mr. Wright," she said, her voice carrying more than she intended. Several passers-by slowed, watching the exchange with undisguised interest. "On the contrary," Wright countered, seemingly oblivious to their audience, "I made a mistake in my hasty assessment of your suitability. I'm prepared to honor our original arrangement. My home is ready. The marriage license can be obtained today." "Mr. Wright," Lillian interrupted, no longer caring who heard. "I appreciate that you've reconsidered your evaluation of my suitability, but I have not reconsidered mine of you. Your letter was perfectly clear about the kind of man you are. The fact that you now view me as acceptable because my health has improved only confirms that assessment." Wright's face darkened. "You're being unreasonable. Our arrangement was mutually beneficial. It still can be. Not to me. Not anymore." Lillian pushed past him, no longer willing to continue the conversation. "In public, think carefully, Miss Abernathy," he called after her. "Silver Falls is a small pond. Without the teaching position, your options here are limited. Very limited indeed." She didn't dignify his words with a response, though they stung with their element of truth. Instead, she continued toward the clinic with determined strides, her breath clouding in the cold air. Dr. Harrison was just emerging from the treatment room when she entered, looking weary but cautiously satisfied. "Ethan?" she asked immediately. "Awake and coherent," he replied, his tired features softening into a smile. "Asking for his mother and complaining about the light hurting his eyes. Both good signs. The next few days will tell us more, but I'm more optimistic than I was yesterday." "Thank God," Lillian breathed, genuine relief washing through her. Whatever happened with her own situation, at least the Davis boy would recover. Dr. Harrison studied her face more carefully. "But you didn't. You come here just for news of Ethan. What happened?" Briefly, Lillian recounted her conversations with both Hollister and Wright, trying to maintain a clinical detachment that crumbled as she reached Wright's final threat. "They're working together," she concluded, pacing the small waiting area. "Hollister wants to protect his son from consequences, and Wright wants to reclaim his investment. I'm simply a pawn in their calculation." "You're nothing of the sort," Dr. Harrison said firmly, "and neither man has as much power as he believes. The school board is meeting this afternoon, without the colonel to balance the vote, Hollister. And Reverend Collins will terminate my contract. I'm certain of it. Then we ensure the colonel attends." Dr. Harrison's tone was matter-of-fact, as if suggesting the most obvious solution. Lillian shook her head. "Mr. Hollister said he's indisposed, with a mild case of gout that I've been treating for the past month. It's uncomfortable, but hardly incapacitating. A gleam of determination appeared in Dr. Harrison's eyes. "I believe I should check on my patient this morning and advise him of certain developments in town." Hope flickered, but Lillian tamped it down. Even if the colonel attends, the vote would be tied 2-2. The school board's charter specifies that ties are broken by a special ballot of 3 community members of good standing. Dr. Harrison replied, "I believe Mrs. Parker, Beatrice Collins, and Mr. Jenkins would qualify. None has children in the school. All are property owners and taxpayers." Lillian stared at him. "How do you know the details of the school board charter?" "I make it a point to understand the governance of institutions that matter," he said simply. "Knowledge is often the best defense against arbitrary power." Before she could respond, the clinic door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and a frantic-looking young man Lillian recognized as one of the miners who had helped transport Ethan after his fall. "Doc!" he gasped, breathless from running. "Come quick! Fire at the assay office!" Dr. Harrison immediately reached for his medical bag. "Injuries? Don't know yet. Flames everywhere. They're trying to keep it from spreading to the mercantile next door." Without hesitation, Dr. Harrison turned to Lillian. "Mrs. Davis is with Ethan. Tell her I've been called away, but will return as soon as possible. If Ethan shows any change, confusion, difficulty speaking, increased pain, have someone fetch me immediately." Lillian nodded, understanding the trust he was placing in her. "Go, I'll watch over him." As Dr. Harrison rushed out with the miner, Lillian moved behind the curtain to the treatment room. Mrs. Davis looked up from her chair beside Ethan's bed, her face drawn with exhaustion, but brightened by relief. The boy himself was indeed awake, pale but alert, his head bandaged neatly. "Miss Abernathy," Ethan mumbled, his voice slightly slurred but recognizable. "Hello, Ethan," she said gently. "Dr. Harrison has been called away to an emergency, but he'll return soon. How are you feeling?" "Head hurts. Lights are too bright." "That's to be expected. You took quite a fall." She turned to Mrs. Davis. "Doctor, Harrison says these are good signs. The coherence, the sensitivity to light, both indicate the brain is functioning normally." Mrs. Davis nodded, her relief palpable. "He knew my name right away when he woke. Knew his brothers' and sisters' names, too." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "He also remembers exactly what happened. Samuel Hollister wasn't roughhousing. He deliberately pushed Ethan after taunting him about his father being crippled in the mine accident." Anger flashed through Lillian again, but she controlled it for Ethan's sake. "We'll address that later. For now, let's focus on your recovery, young man." She had just settled into a chair on the other side of Ethan's bed when commotion erupted outside. Shouts, running footsteps, the clang of the town's fire bell ringing in urgent peals. "Sounds bad out there," Mrs. Davis murmured, glancing toward the curtained doorway. "Dr. Harrison said there was a fire at the assay office," Lillian explained. "They're working to contain it." More shouts came from outside, closer now, and the acrid smell of smoke began to seep into the clinic. Lillian rose, moving to the front window to assess the situation. What she saw made her blood run cold. The assay office was fully engulfed. Flames shooting from its windows and roof. But worse, the fire had already spread to the adjacent building, the mercantile, and sparks were flying dangerously close to the surrounding structures, including the clinic itself. As she watched in horror, a gust of wind drove a shower of burning embers directly onto the clinic's shingled roof. "Mrs. Davis," Lillian said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "we need to move Ethan immediately. The fire is spreading toward us." The woman's face blanched with fresh fear. "Move him?" "But Dr. Harrison said—" Dr. Harrison couldn't have anticipated the fire reaching the clinic, Lillian interjected firmly. "We need to get Ethan somewhere safe, away from the fire, now." Outside, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The mercantile's facade was now fully ablaze, and men were forming bucket chains from the town's well, their efforts seeming pitifully inadequate against the ferocity of the flames. Smoke billowed thick and black, obscuring parts of the street. "Where can we take him?" Mrs. Davis asked, already gathering her son's few belongings. "Our home is on the other side of town, too far to carry him in this condition." Lillian thought quickly. The schoolhouse, its stone foundation, and the creek nearby should keep it safe from the fire. "Can Ethan walk at all?" The boy tried to sit up, grimacing with pain. "I can try," he said gamely. "No," Lillian decided, seeing his struggle. "We'll need to carry him." She looked around the clinic, spotting a narrow cot that could serve as a makeshift stretcher. "Help me with this, Mrs. Davis." Together they transferred Ethan to the cot, wrapping him securely in blankets. Against the cold outside, the boy was lightweight for his 12 years, but still too heavy for the two women to carry far. "We'll need help," Lillian said, mentally reviewing their options. Most able-bodied men would be fighting the fire. As if in answer to her thoughts, the clinic door burst open, admitting Theodore Wright of all people, his face smudged with soot, his expression urgent. "Miss Abernathy, the fire's spreading fast. This whole block could go up. You need to evacuate now." For once, Lillian was genuinely glad to see him. "Mr. Wright, perfect timing. We need to move Ethan Davis to the schoolhouse. Can you help carry him?" Wright looked momentarily taken aback, but quickly assessed the situation and nodded. "I'll take one end. Mrs. Davis, you guide his head. Miss Abernathy, grab any medical supplies Dr. Harrison might need for the boy." It was efficiently commanding. Lillian had to admit, perhaps there was more to Theodore Wright than she had credited. Working swiftly, Lillian gathered bandages, Dr. Harrison's tincture for pain, clean cloths, and a bottle of distilled water. She stuffed these into a satchel, along with the few personal items Ethan had with him. Outside, the scene had grown even, more chaotic. The fire had indeed spread farther, with flames now visible on the roof of the building adjacent to the clinic. The heat was intense, even from several yards away, and smoke made breathing difficult. "This way," Lillian called, leading them away from the main street toward the path that wound behind the buildings to the schoolhouse. Their progress was slow and awkward. Wright bore most of Ethan's weight, with Mrs. Davis supporting the boy's head and shoulders as they navigated the snowy path. Lillian forged ahead, clearing the way and watching for hazards. They had just rounded the back of the last building on the block when a tremendous crash sounded behind them. Turning, they saw that the mercantile's roof had collapsed entirely, sending a fountain of sparks and flaming debris skyward. Some of this fiery hail landed on the clinic's roof, which immediately began to smoke ominously. "Faster!" Wright urged, increasing his pace despite the obvious strain of carrying Ethan. By the time they reached the schoolhouse, all four were gasping for breath, from exertion, from smoke, from the sheer terror of their narrow escape. Lillian fumbled with her key, her cold fingers clumsy with urgency, but finally managed to unlock the door. The schoolroom felt blessedly cool and calm after the inferno they'd fled. Wright gently lowered Ethan onto two student desks pushed together, while Mrs. Davis immediately began checking her son for any signs that the rough journey had worsened his condition. "He seems all right," she reported, relief evident in her voice. "No new bleeding, no increased confusion." Lillian sagged against her desk, the adrenaline that had carried her through the evacuation beginning to ebb. "Thank God." Wright stood awkwardly. Nearby, his usual commanding presence tempered by uncertainty. "I should get back," he said finally. "They need every hand to fight the fire." "Of course," Lillian nodded. "And thank you, Mr. Wright. We couldn't have moved Ethan without your help." He acknowledged her gratitude with a curt nod, then hesitated. "For what it's worth, Miss Abernathy, I was wrong about you. Whatever else lies between us, I was wrong about your strength. You've proven that today, and every day since you arrived in Silver Falls." Before she could formulate a response to this unexpected admission, he was gone, striding back toward the burning town center with the same purposeful energy she'd witnessed at the clinic. "That's quite an admirer you have," Mrs. Davis observed, her attention still focused primarily on Ethan. First Dr. Harrison, now Mr. Wright. Quite the change from being left at the station, wouldn't you say? Lillian felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the distant fire. "Dr. Harrison and I are colleagues," she said carefully, "and Mr. Wright and I had an arrangement that ended before it began." Mrs. Davis's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. "If you say so, Miss Abernathy, but I've lived in frontier towns long enough to recognize when a man looks at a woman as more than just a colleague." Before Lillian could protest further, the schoolhouse door opened again, admitting Dr. Harrison himself, his medical bag clutched. In one soot-blackened hand, his face etched with relief when he spotted them. "Thank God," he breathed. "When I saw the clinic was threatened, I feared—" He broke off, visibly composing himself. "Mrs. Davis, Ethan, you're both well?" "Thanks to Miss Abernathy," Mrs. Davis replied. "She organized our evacuation just in time. The clinic roof was catching fire as we left." Dr. Harrison's eyes found Lillian's, filled with something more complex than mere gratitude. "Quick thinking, though I would have expected nothing less." He moved to examine Ethan, his hands gentle as he checked the boy's bandages and pupils. "No worse for the journey, it seems. You're a tough young man, Ethan Davis." "Is the town burning down?" Ethan asked, his voice small with worry. "Not if we can help it," Dr. Harrison assured him. "The bucket brigade is holding the line at the mercantile now. The assay office is lost, I'm afraid, and likely my clinic as well. But the rest may be saved if the wind doesn't shift." "Your medicines, your equipment," Lillian began, distressed by the thought of all he stood to lose. "I managed to save the essentials," he said, patting his medical bag. "The rest is replaceable. Lives aren't." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the schoolhouse window, they could see a group approaching. Colonel Pemberton, leaning heavily on a cane, but moving with determination. Reverend Collins, his clerical collar askew. And to Lillian's surprise, Mr. Hollister, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "It appears the school board meeting has relocated," Dr. Harrison observed dryly. The schoolhouse had never held such tension. Colonel Pemberton, Reverend Collins, and Mr. Hollister stood in an awkward semicircle near the door, while Lillian, Dr. Harrison, Mrs. Davis, and Ethan formed an unintentional opposing group at the front of the room. Outside, the distant shouts and commotion of firefighting efforts provided a chaotic backdrop to the unlikely meeting. "Miss Abernathy," Colonel Pemberton spoke first, his military bearing somewhat diminished by the cane he leaned upon, but his voice still commanding. "Dr. Harrison informed me of the irregular proceedings planned for this afternoon. I felt it imperative that I attend, despite my physician's recommendations." Here he cast a meaningful glance at Dr. Harrison, who merely nodded, his expression neutral. "I believe," the colonel continued, "that recent events may necessitate a reconsideration of the matter at hand." Mr. Hollister stepped forward, clearly displeased by this development. "Colonel, with all due respect, this is hardly the time or place for a formal board meeting. The town is literally burning. And yet you found time to threaten Miss Abernathy's position this morning," Mrs. Davis interjected sharply, her protective maternal instinct extending now to Lillian. "Before the fire, before any emergency, you were quite prepared to dismiss her without a hearing." Hollister's face tightened. "That is a board matter, Mrs. Davis, not—" "It became my matter when your son pushed mine down an embankment and nearly killed him," she retorted, her voice rising. "And then you sought to protect Samuel by removing the one person who insisted on accountability." Ethan stirred on his makeshift bed. "It's true," he said, his voice weak but clear. Samuel said my pa was useless now after the mine accident. Said we were charity cases. I tried to walk away like Miss Abernathy taught us to do when someone's trying to make us angry, but he kept following me. Then he pushed me hard, said maybe I'd end up crippled like my pa. The boy's simple testimony hung in the air, his pale face and bandaged head providing silent corroboration. Reverend Collins, until now silent, stepped forward, his expression troubled. These are serious accusations against your son, Mr. Hollister. Children's quarrels, Hollister dismissed, though with noticeably less confidence than before. Boys will be held accountable for their actions, Colonel Pemberton cut in firmly, as will the adults who attempt to obscure the truth. Dr. Harrison moved to Ethan's side, checking the boy's pulse unobtrusively while keeping his attention on the unfolding confrontation. Perhaps, he suggested mildly, we should address the immediate concerns first. Ethan needs rest. The town requires all able hands for firefighting, and the school board apparently has pressing business regarding Miss Abernathy's employment. There is no pressing business, Colonel Pemberton declared, shooting a pointed look at Hollister. Any consideration of Miss Abernathy's contract will follow proper procedures, including a full hearing with all interested parties present. Reverend Collins nodded agreement. That seems only fair, particularly in light of... He gestured vaguely toward Ethan. Hollister looked as if he might object, but at that moment the schoolhouse door swung open again, admitting Theodore Wright. Snow and ash dusted his coat, and his face bore fresh smudges of soot. Fire contained, he announced to the room at large. Lost the assay office and mercantile. Doc's clinic is damaged but not destroyed. The bucket brigade is still working, but the danger of spreading is past. His gaze settled on Lillian briefly before taking in the assembled school board. Didn't mean to interrupt official business? Not at all, Mr. Wright, Colonel Pemberton replied with formal courtesy. In fact, your timing is providential. I understand you've recently renewed your interest in Miss Abernathy. Wright shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting this direct approach. That's a private matter between Miss Abernathy and myself. Under normal circumstances, I would agree, the Colonel continued undeterred. However, when personal arrangements intersect with public institutions such as our school, clarity benefits everyone. Lillian stepped forward, unwilling to be discussed as if absent. Colonel Pemberton, I appreciate your concern, but Mr. Wright is correct in one respect. My personal decisions are my own. Indeed they are, the Colonel agreed readily. And I would not presume to influence them. I merely wish to ensure that no one else attempts to do so through inappropriate leverage. His pointed gaze at Hollister made the reference unmistakable. The banker's face flushed with angry color, but before he could respond, a new commotion arose outside. Samuel Hollister burst into the schoolhouse, his normally neat appearance disheveled, his face streaked with tears and soot. He stopped short. At the sight of the assembled adults, his expression shifting rapidly from desperation to confusion. "Pa!" he gasped, seemingly oblivious to the tension in the room. "They're saying it's my fault, about the fire." Mr. Hollister's demeanor changed, instantly from confrontational to concerned. "What nonsense is this? You were nowhere near the fire, Samuel." "I was," the boy admitted, his voice cracking. "Not when it started, but I knew. I saw Jacob and Thomas playing with matches behind the assay office yesterday. They said they were just going to burn some trash for a prank, but I knew they shouldn't." "And you said nothing?" Reverend Collins asked, his normally gentle voice sharp with shock. Samuel's face crumpled. "I didn't think they'd really do it, and after what happened with Ethan, I didn't want more trouble. But now people are saying because I pushed Ethan, I'm responsible for the fire too, and..." He broke off, overwhelmed by the magnitude of events he'd helped set in motion. The revelation landed like a physical blow in the small room. Lillian found herself looking not at Samuel but at his father, watching the man's face as he processed what his son had just revealed. For the first time since she'd encountered him, Mr. Hollister's calculating facade cracked, showing genuine distress beneath. "Samuel," he began, then seemed at a loss for words. Dr. Harrison spoke into the strained silence, his tone neutral but authoritative. "The fire's causes will be investigated properly. For now, Samuel's knowledge may help identify any remaining danger spots. Mr. Hollister, perhaps you should take your son to Sheriff Mason. His information could prevent further damage." It was a graceful exit offered to both Hollisters, and after a moment's hesitation, the banker nodded stiffly. "Come, Samuel. We have matters to address." As they departed, Reverend Collins turned to Lillian, his expression somber. "Miss Abernathy, I believe I owe you an apology. It seems I was prepared to make a judgment without full information, a failing my position should have taught me to avoid." "We are all capable of error, Reverend," Lillian replied, conscious of the various ways she herself had misjudged situations and people since arriving in Silver Falls. "What matters is our willingness to correct course when new truths emerge." Theodore. Wright shifted his weight, drawing attention back to his presence. "If the school board has concluded its business, I should return to the firefighting efforts." "Of course," Colonel Pemberton nodded. "And the board thanks you for your assistance today, Mr. Wright. Silver Falls values citizens who step forward. In times of crisis, the formal praise seemed to both please and discomfit Wright. He nodded acknowledgement, his gaze again finding Lillian. "Miss Abernathy, when you have a moment, there are matters we should discuss without an audience." "I'll find you later," Lillian promised, her tone making it clear that later would be at her convenience, not his. After Wright and Reverend Collins had departed to assist with the ongoing emergency, only Colonel Pemberton remained of the school board. He settled heavily into Lillian's desk chair, his injured legs stretched before him. "Quite the day for Silver Falls," he observed dryly. "And for you in particular, Miss Abernathy." "It's been eventful," she agreed, suddenly aware of her own exhaustion. Between the emotional confrontation with Hollister that morning, Theodore Wright's reappearance, the fire, and evacuating Ethan, she had been running on little more than adrenaline for hours. Dr. Harrison seemed to notice her fatigue. "Mrs. Davis, Ethan should be moved somewhere more comfortable once the situation in town stabilizes. Your home, perhaps?" "My sister's closet," Mrs. Davis replied, "and she's a former nurse. She can help me watch him tonight." "Good, I'll arrange. Transportation when it's safe to move him again." He turned to Lillian. "You should rest as well. Smoke inhalation can exacerbate respiratory conditions, even those responding well to treatment." Colonel Pemberton levered himself to his feet with a grimace. "I should check on my wife. She worries when there's excitement in town." He paused at the door, looking back at Lillian. "The school board will meet properly next week to address recent events. But you should know, Miss Abernathy, that your position is secure. In fact, I believe a formal commendation may be in order." After he left, the schoolhouse fell silent except for Ethan's soft breathing. Mrs. Davis had dozed off in a student chair beside her son, her hand still holding him even in sleep. "They both need proper rest," Dr. Harrison said quietly. "As do you." Lillian nodded, moving to the window. Outside, the smoke had thinned, and organized activity had replaced the earlier chaos. Men were clearing debris, securing damaged structures, ensuring no hidden embers threatened new outbreaks. "Your clinic," she said suddenly, remembering. "You said it was damaged?" "The roof and back wall took the worst of it. The front rooms are largely smoke-damaged, but intact." His tone was matter-of-fact, betraying little emotion about what must be a significant loss. "Your medicines, your books. Most of my important remedies are stored in metal containers. Books can be replaced. The structure itself can be rebuilt." He joined her at the window, standing close enough that she could sense his presence without them actually touching. What matters is surviving. The simple statement encompassed much more than material possessions, Lillian realized. In the chaos of fire and confrontation, priorities had clarified, pretenses had fallen away, truths had emerged. "Thank you," she said softly, "for intervening with the school board, for treating Ethan, for—" She trailed off, not sure how to express the depth of her gratitude for his steady presence throughout the challenges she'd faced. "You would have managed without my intervention," he replied, a hint of amusement warming his voice. "You're remarkably capable, Lillian Abernathy, more so than even you realize." The use of her full name, spoken with such quiet confidence, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them back, unwilling to give in to emotion now. "What will you do about Theodore Wright?" Dr. Harrison asked after a moment, his tone carefully neutral. Lillian considered the question. "Hear what he has to say, I suppose. He did help with Ethan today, but—" She turned to face him directly. "If you're asking whether I intend to accept his renewed offer, the answer is no. I didn't travel west to be someone's convenient solution, not his, not anyone's." Something shifted in Dr. Harrison's expression, a softening, a relief perhaps. "Good," he said simply. They stood in companionable silence as afternoon light slanted through the schoolhouse windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. "I should check on other patients," Dr. Harrison said eventually. "The fire likely caused minor injuries that needed attention, even with my clinic damaged." "Of course," Lillian nodded. "I'll stay with Ethan and Mrs. Davis until arrangements can be made to move them." He gathered his medical bag, pausing at the door. "Lillian," he began, then hesitated, searching for words. "When things settle, when the immediate crises have passed, I'd like to speak with you about possibilities." The deliberate vagueness of possibilities contained worlds of potential meaning, but the look in his eyes left little doubt about the particular possibility uppermost in his mind. "I'd like that," Lillian replied, her voice steadier than her suddenly racing heart. After he left, she returned to her desk, absently straightening papers that had been disturbed during Ethan's hasty placement on the makeshift bed. Her mind replayed Dr. Harrison's words, the careful way he'd said possibilities, the warmth in his eyes that belied his professional demeanor. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Theodore Wright stood in the doorway again, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "May I come in?" he asked, his usual commanding tone subdued. Lillian nodded, gesturing to a student desk near where she stood. "Briefly, Mrs. Davis and Ethan need their rest." Wright glanced at the sleeping pair, then returned his attention to Lillian. "I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to say—" He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I made a significant error in judgment when I wrote that letter. I judged you as inadequate based on second-hand reports of a health condition. Today, I saw you organize an evacuation under dangerous conditions, stand your ground against improper accusations, and maintain your dignity throughout. I was wrong, and I acknowledge that." The admission clearly cost him something in pride, and Lillian found herself respecting the effort, if not the man himself. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means something." Wright nodded, turning his hat in his hands. "The offer still stands, if you're interested. My home is built, the land is good, and I believe we could make a sensible partnership." Lillian studied him thoughtfully. Theodore Wright before her was indeed a different man from the one who had rejected her by letter, more human, more humble in his way. But he wasn't offering love or even particular understanding. He was offering a sensible partnership, a practical arrangement between two adults with complementary needs. Once that would have been enough. Once security and respectability would have outweighed more personal considerations. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I must decline." The woman who agreed to marry you sight unseen no longer exists. The woman I am now requires more." Wright's expression flickered with disappointment but not surprise. "Dr. Harrison," he said, "not a question but a statement." Lillian didn't confirm or deny it. Her feelings for Dr. Harrison were too new, too fragile to be exposed to Theodore Wright's assessment. "I wish you well, Mr. Wright," she said instead. Truly, he accepted the finality in her tone with a nod, replacing his hat. "Likewise, Miss Abernathy, Silver Falls is fortunate to have you." After he left, Lillian sank into her chair, feeling as if she'd been holding her breath for weeks and had finally exhaled. The confrontation with Hollister, the revelation of Samuel's connection to the fire, Theodore Wright's acknowledgement of his error and her refusal of his second offer, each had been a knot untied, a complication resolved. And Dr. Harrison's promised conversation about possibilities hovered on the horizon. Like dawn after a long night, spring arrived properly in Silver Falls 3 weeks after the fire. The snow retreated to the highest peaks, and green shoots pushed through the thawing earth with determined optimism. In town, reconstruction progressed steadily. The mercantile rising from its ashes with a grander facade, the assay office rebuilt. With stone rather than timber, Dr. Harrison's clinic restored, with improvements suggested by the physician himself. Lillian's classroom had never been damaged, but it too had undergone transformation. New books lined shelves built by grateful parents. A proper anatomical chart, donated by Dr. Harrison, hung beside maps of the nation and the world. Most significantly, every seat was filled, including those previously occupied by Samuel Hollister and his closest allies. The banker's son had returned to school after a week's suspension, chastened by the near-disastrous consequences of his actions and his father's newly stringent expectations. His apology to Ethan Davis had been awkward but seemingly sincere, accepted with the resilience of youth, more interested in moving forward than dwelling on past grievances. Mr. Hollister himself had undergone a more private reckoning. His son's involvement in concealing information about the fire's origins had shaken his certainty, forcing him to confront the consequences of valuing position over principle. While not exactly warm toward Lillian, he had become scrupulously correct in their interactions, even supporting her request for additional school supplies at the most recent town council meeting. Ethan Davis had recovered fully, returning to classes with a dramatic story and a newfound status among his peers. His father, though still walking with a cane after the mine accident, had found work managing the rebuilt mercantile's inventory, a position better suited to his altered physical capabilities and offering more reliable income than mining. For Dr. Harrison and Lillian, their conversation about possibilities had indeed taken place, extending over several meetings that evolved from professional consultations about her treatment to shared meals at Eleanor Parker's boarding house, to walks along the creek as the weather improved. Today marked a different kind of milestone. For the first time since arriving in Silver Falls, Lillian had gone an entire week without a single coughing episode. Dr. Harrison had pronounced her condition managed, if not cured, a qualification that reflected his medical caution rather than any doubt about her improvement. To celebrate, he had invited her for a picnic on the first truly warm Saturday of the season. They sat now on a hillside overlooking Silver Falls, the town's new buildings gleaming in the afternoon sunlight, the surrounding mountains still capped with snow but green spreading upward with each passing day. "The treatment has exceeded even my expectations," Dr. Harrison, Nathaniel, as she now called him in private, observed, watching her breathing the clean mountain air without difficulty. "Though I credit the patient's constitution as much as the physician's concoction." Lillian smiled, acknowledging the compliment. "A fortunate combination, it seems, much like Silver Falls itself." "How so?" he asked, genuinely curious. It's a place of contrasts that somehow work together, the roughness of the mines alongside, attempts at civilization, the harsh climate producing the most beautiful spring flowers, the crisis of fire leading to better-built structures. She plucked a wildflower from beside the blanket, twirling it thoughtfully. Even the people, Colonel Pemberton's military precision balanced by Beatrice Collins's creative flair, Eleanor Parker's practical wisdom alongside Reverend Collins's spiritual guidance. And a Philadelphia seamstress finding her place as a frontier teacher, Nathaniel added softly. That too, she agreed. Though I sometimes wonder what would have happened if Theodore Wright had met me at the station as planned, if he hadn't written that letter. Nathaniel considered this, his expression thoughtful. You'd have married him, I suppose, moved to his homestead. Perhaps I found some measure of contentment in time. Perhaps, Lillian conceded. But I wouldn't have discovered what I'm capable of on my own. I wouldn't have built something that's truly mine. She gazed down at the schoolhouse, visible as a white rectangle near the edge of town. I wouldn't have known that I could be valued for my mind and spirit, not just my ability to maintain a household. And Silver Falls would be much poorer for it, Nathaniel said, reaching to take her hand. His touch was warm, familiar now, after weeks of gradually increasing closeness. As would I. The simple declaration contained no flowery sentiments, no grand promises, just honest acknowledgement of what had grown between them. It was, Lillian thought, perfectly suited to both the man and the place. I've been corresponding with a colleague in Denver, Nathaniel continued, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. He's intrigued by our success with your respiratory treatment, believes it might help others with similar conditions. That's wonderful, Lillian said sincerely. Your work deserves wider recognition. He suggested I document the formula and treatment protocols for publication in a medical journal. Nathaniel's voice held an undertone of excitement he rarely revealed. It would mean organizing my notes, conducting proper follow-up with patients who've received variations of the treatment, possibly even traveling to Denver to present the findings. You should absolutely do it, Lillian encouraged. Think of how many others might benefit. He nodded, still looking at their joined hands. I've been considering what such a project would mean for my practice here. The documentation alone would require significant time. If the treatment gains attention, there might be correspondence, requests for consultations. You'd need help, Lillian realized, seeing where his thoughts led. Someone organized, detail-oriented, with a good understanding of the treatment itself. Someone who has experienced it firsthand, he agreed, finally meeting her eyes directly. Someone whose precision I've come to rely on when preparing remedies. Someone whose intelligence and insight I've grown to value above all others. The implication was clear, and Lillian felt her heart quicken. Are you offering me a position, Dr. Harrison? I'm offering you a partnership, he corrected gently. Professional, certainly, but not only that. Not for some time now. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a carved wooden ring, the grain of the wood following a spiral pattern that caught the afternoon light. I'm not Theodore Wright, he said quietly. I can't offer a large homestead or material wealth. What I can offer is work that matters, respect that's already been earned, and love that grew not from arrangement, but from genuine knowledge. Lillian looked at the ring, then at the man holding it, this quiet, competent healer who had seen her value from their first meeting, who had treated her as a capable equal rather than a damaged commodity, whose steady presence had become the foundation she built upon rather than a cage that contained her. I'm not the woman who arrived at that station expecting someone else to define her worth, she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. I don't need material wealth or grand promises. I need purpose, respect, and She took a breath, still marveling at the ease with which it filled her lungs. And love freely given, not as charity or convenience, but as choice. Nathaniel's smile transformed his serious face, reaching his eyes in a way that still made her heart skip. Then we understand each other perfectly. As he slipped the wooden ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as she might have expected from his meticulous attention to detail, Lillian thought of all the twists and turns that had led to this moment. The rejection that had felt like an ending had been merely the first step on a different path. The ailment that had defined her limitations had led her to the man who helped her transcend them. "It won't always be easy," Nathaniel cautioned, ever the pragmatist. "Silver Falls remains a frontier town with all that entails. Your health, while improved, will require ongoing attention. My work has its demands and disappointments." "Life has demands and disappointments everywhere," Lillian replied, leaning forward to place her hand against his cheek. "What matters is facing them together, as equals, by choice." Below them, Silver Falls continued its daily rhythms, the shift, change at the mines, children playing in the schoolyard during their Saturday freedom, the newly rebuilt mercantile bustling with customers. Lillian's gaze lingered on the town that had become home, not through any arrangement, but through the connections she'd formed, the respect she'd earned, the life she'd built from disappointment. The mail-order bride, rejected for being too sickly, had found her place not through marriage, but through her own capabilities, discovered alongside the frontier pharmacist who had seen her worth from the beginning. That he now offered marriage as well seemed not the fulfillment of an old plan, but the beginning of a new one they would write together, step by step, breath by strengthening breath. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.